My friends, cavalry is back on the modern battlefield. Turtle tanks were not enough. Now the Russian army is working on the remake of Mad Max. Entire Russian regiments are implementing special motorized assault detachments, equipped with motorbikes and ATVs. Forget helicopters and air assault units. If you need reinforcements ASAP, just call in a squad of iron horses. Like Russian war reporter Alexander Harchenko said, "We are the horde, and the horde is moving forward." Thing is, the mainstream media is trying so hard to mark this new warfare tactic and mark it as obsolete. Here on the 7th of May, Forbes reported, after losing nearly 15,000 combat vehicles in the first 2 years of its wider war, Russia got desperate. Russia is now running low on purpose-built armored vehicles, so now they're riding their unprotected bikes directly at Ukrainian positions. This is pure cope because in reality these motorized assaults work, especially in the wide open fields of Zaporizhia Oblast. And it's not me saying it, it's the Ukrainians themselves. A Ukrainian brigade commander told AFP earlier this month that Russian forces were employing unusual tactics to advance, including off-road motorcycles. Okay, now listen closely to what he's gonna say. These vehicles helped Russian forces breach our positions. It's not a surprise considering these motorized assaults are preceded by an intense artillery preparation, followed by multiple drone strikes. Once the enemy is pinned down in their dugouts, these bikes can easily cross some of the most rugged terrain within seconds as they zip by Ukrainian firing positions. And all of a sudden they're on top of enemy strongholds. When in doubt, always be the one on top. With that being said, these guys really have balls of steel. Some like to get the monk defense bonus before charging at full speed. Others accept their fate of ghost riders, like this Russian soldier who poetically said, "I'm a stormtrooper, I don't give a F," to which his friend said, "Who dies first is a pussy."
It's very poetic.
Despite all the benefits of using motorcycles and all the tactical successes, the only thing Forbes could come up with is more propaganda. Dozens of Russians attacked Voletar on dirt bikes. A Ukrainian brigade blew up 19 of them. Ukrainian Telegram channels even said their troops have created a real killing field. Yet you will notice that on these pictures there are no bodies of Russian soldiers that have been KIA. We just see abandoned motorcycles to which the Ukrainians added red rectangles. Yet another victory by the valiant Photoshop brigade. Jokes aside, of course these Ghost Rider missions are dangerous, as they're the first ones to go into this hail of bullets. And it's not rare that they're directly targeted by enemy artillery, but their main threat is enemy FPV drones. So in this video we will analyze why the Russian army even started using motorcycles in Ukraine and what we can expect of such units in the future. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukraine war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. So why do we see units equipped with motorbikes in Ukraine? If I remember correctly, part of the reason for the Ukrainian failure during the 2023 summer counteroffensive was due to very mobile Russian ATGM crews moving on ATVs. They would dismount in tree lines and then ambush Ukrainian columns with their cornets. However, the first official combat use of motorcycles in Ukraine with video evidence dates back from the 9th of April 2024. Soldiers from the Storm Detachment of the 123rd Brigade of the LPR carried out a daring attack on motorcycles in the Siversk area north of Bakhmut. Everything started with a precise artillery preparation as well as drone swarms to pin down the defenders. At the same time, the motorcycle unit departed Berestove and then drove at full speed for 5 kilometers to reach the Ukrainian stronghold. And you know what makes my job super easy? That combat unit even explained why they use motorcycles.
Мотоцикл — это одно из тактических превосходств. То есть ты тактически обходишь быстрее, маневреннее, продвигаешься к окопу. Стреляешь в этот момент с мотоцикла. То есть много можно сделать на нем, чему не сделать пешком.
Штурмовики специально тренировались вести огонь на ходу. Правая рука на руле, в левой автомат.
It's just like in the Lord of the Rings. We have DPR coal miners digging caves and tunnels like the dwarves, and the LPR militias LARPing as the riders of Rohan. So wait a second, so who are the orcs? This special military operation was considered a success. So in the weeks following this attack, Russian units ramped up their use of motorcycle units. Russian war reporter War Gonzo even did a piece stating how motorcycles have become the new horses of war. On the 18th of June, Spanish newspaper El País reported, motorcycles are a good tactic because they're harder for drones to intercept. They're less noisy and faster than armored vehicles or SUVs. For example, in this video, you can see how Ukrainian artillery fired a round of cluster munitions. But the paratroopers on the ATV were too fast. They zipped by and avoided a direct hit. Same story here near Chasiv, where an assault motorcycle unit passed through an entire enemy artillery barrage. A couple days later, the New York Times interviewed Ukrainian Lieutenant Mikhailo Hubitsky. He described a Russian motorcycle assault by saying, "They moved fast, they spread out, and they swerved." But, the New York Times had to cope by riding. In the latest tactic for storming trenches, Russians use motorcycles and dune buggies to speed across open space, often into a hail of gunfire. This is pure lies, and you'll understand why later in the video when we analyze motorcycle assault tactics. The part of the front where motorcycle units were the most extensively used was in the big open fields of Zaporizhia Oblast, especially with the flat and dry ground. For example, just like we could see on the 6th of May near the infamous village of Robotine, we see two Russian soldiers on the same motorbike. They stop at these ruins, whoops, one of them falls, they get back up, they clear the basement by throwing a grenade before going inside. Also notice how they were followed by a drone guiding their combat action. Assault motorcycle units also played a huge role in the Battle of Staromayorsk. On the 23rd of May, a detachment of 7 motorcyclists pushed right at the center of the village. This surprise attack must have stunned the Ukrainian defenders. All of a sudden, they had Russian soldiers in the back. 2 weeks later, by the 10th of June, most of Staromayorsk was under Russian control. On the 2nd of July, these Mad Max stormtroopers, this time both on motorcycles and ATVs, used speed and the element of surprise of their unconventional attack to capture an important forest belt north of Staromayorsk. After racing to the enemy stronghold, the assault detachment quickly jumped off from their motorcycles right into the trenches, and the Ukrainian soldiers simply fled from their positions.
Мотокроссовые мотоциклы, они более маневреннее, устойчивее на такой местности. То есть едем быстро и неожиданно для врага. Ну, от дронов маленечко посложнее, приходится увиливать, потому что FPV-шки летают 140 км в час груженные. Бывают с ними сложности, конечно, но...
This is where the Russian command acknowledged the utility of such lightning raids. That's how a couple days later, Marines of the 40th Naval Infantry Brigade used the same motorcycle assault tactics on the village of Urozhaine, on the other side of the river, but on a larger scale. Everything started with a large bombardment of TOS-1A thermobaric MRLS on Ukrainian positions to pin down the enemy in the basements. That's when IVs spearheaded the attack along the main road. In this frame you can see 4 of them pushing inside Urozhaine from the center and the flanks. This group of 3 IVs disembarked their infantry component before going back to pick up the second batch of troops. So that was the main shaft of the operation. But that's when the Russians unleashed a second one to target the rear area of the Ukrainian defense. That's when multiple combat teams on motorcycles approached the battlefield, like the 16-man Storm unit. In a lightning dash, they flanked the village of Urozhaine at full speed, and all of a sudden fell upon Ukrainian fortifications. Russian stormtroopers dismounted from their motorcycles or ATVs and cleared the fallback trenches of the enemy, while other units cleared one building after another. Within an hour and a half, the village was theirs. That's how on the 13th of July, the village of Urozhaine fell into Russian hands. From that moment on, all across the front, more and more Russian units combined their regular mechanized assaults with motorbike raids. For example, in this video, we can see about 10 motorcyclists that come at full speed before dropping their bikes and continuing the assault on foot. Russian military blogger Alexander Sladkov suggested that every Russian brigade should follow the same example and establish its own motorcycle platoons. Another advantage is that if assault detachments suffer casualties during an attack, the commander of the unit can immediately send in motorcyclists as replacements to keep the momentum going and carry on the offensive. The rapid deployment of assault groups right on top of enemy strongholds has already proven its effectiveness. But motorcycles are not only used for combat missions. In Krasnohorivka, men from the 5th Brigade uplot of the DPR drove to the contact line to deliver packs of water bottles and various supplies. In less than a minute, they were back on the road. And 5 minutes after that, they touched down at the rear operating base. We have seen many motorbikes being able to carry 2 soldiers in full kit, meaning a driver could theoretically carry up to 80 or 90 kilograms of cargo behind him, which can be translated in a lot of ammunition and supplies. This means motorcycle units can move undetected and resupply friendly combat units that have infiltrated enemy positions. Think of the tactical advantage this can give the Russian army. However, for motorcycles, it's easier to carry a 90-kilogram soldier than the same weight of cargo. The motorbike will be unstable and it will constantly fall. That's why, as you can see in this footage, ATVs can be more suitable for the job, especially if they're equipped with a trailer where they can carry even more cargo. On top of that, motorcycles are occasionally used for Medevac operations. But once again, the task is typically assigned to ATV crews, since they offer more space for transporting wounded soldiers. So why didn't anyone think of using motorbikes in combat before? Well, there are 2 things we have to look at: history and technology. From a historical perspective, it's really not a new concept. Modern motorcycle units are the closest to what we call dragoons in the military. Even during medieval times, you had the mounted knights that could dismount and fight on foot. But if we narrow this down to the age of firearms, during the 1500s, we witnessed the rise of arquebusiers. And just like knights a couple centuries before, soon enough transformed into mounted arquebusiers, who moved on horseback and dismounted to release their loads. Later, the concept was institutionalized with the creation of the King's Dragoon Regiment around 1600 by Henry IV of France. After that, many countries copy-pasted the idea and created their own regiments of dragoons. Fast forward to the Napoleonic era. In the French army, dragoons were typically soldiers equipped with M1777 carbine, trained to fight on foot like regular infantry, but capable of quick mobility on horseback, all the while being able to charge the enemy with the tip of their sword if need be. Although on one side they evolved into versatile cavalry units able to engage in both mounted and dismounted combat, combining the speed of cavalry with the tactical flexibility of infantry. On the other hand, commanders also became aware of the limitations of dragoons as they had to be trained both in infantry and cavalry. AKA, they sucked at both, and because of that they were often provided with the worst horses possible, all the while being unable to outmatch regular line infantry units. Although in theory dragoons were useful to rapidly deploy riflemen to critical parts of the battlefield, once the men dismounted, you always needed to find a place in the back to keep all the horses, which was not an easy task in the middle of a battlefield. In the end, during the Napoleonic era, French dragoons were mostly used to chase down Spanish guerrillas, with a certain degree of success. Perhaps the limitations of dragoons were due to limitations in technology. For example, most cavalry units that served during the US Civil War were actually closer to mounted infantry, aka dragoons. One such example is the intervention of Union General John Wilder's Lightning Brigade during the 1863 Battle of Chickamauga. Wilder's men quickly deployed to the key point of the battlefield on horseback and then dismounted. Where technology was crucial is because his men were equipped with Spencer rifles that could fire 7 shots in quick succession before needing to be reloaded. That's how Wilder's Lightning Brigade covered the retreat of the entire Union Army. By the way, if you're interested, I made an entire video about this battle a couple years ago. The same could be said in the following decades, with US cavalry regiments fighting in the Indian Wars as well as in the Spanish-American War. Now, during the late 1800s, European cavalry did not follow the same development. And one of the first countries to notice this was the British cavalry when they fought against the Boers in South Africa. The British military quickly realized that cavalry charges were obsolete against the firepower available. In response, they transformed most of their cavalry units into mounted infantry. Still, it's really World War I that made it impossible to use horses on the battlefield, at least on the Western Front. Fast forward to World War II with their motorcycle units, used by the Germans, the Italians, even the Soviets. But I would not say they had the same role as mounted infantry, because they would not typically dismount to fight. A closer example would be the Danish Bicycle Regiment that fought off against the Germans on the 9th of April 1940. They were portrayed in the Danish movie called The 9th of April. Turns out I made a reaction about this movie. If you're interested, I'll put the link in the description below. Another example would be the Japanese soldiers that used bicycles to move off-road across the Malayan Peninsula in 1942. And they did so with great success because this led directly to the fall of Singapore. The main reason bicycle infantry was abandoned was because it provides zero protection and transportation capabilities were limited. Fast forward to the 21st century with the rise of counter-insurgency operations. For example, here you can see British paratroopers on motorbikes during Operation Telek in 2003 in Kuwait. But it's really in the immensity of the Sahel region where insurgent fighters made the most use of motorbikes, mostly due to their low cost, speed, and the mobility they provided. In other words, it was the poor man's motorized regiment. Think about it, each motorcycle is able to carry ammunition, supplies, and sometimes as many as 3 fighters. And it's also very convenient for African men that have multiple wives to drive left and right. In terms of warfare, in the blink of an eye, insurgents could concentrate at one location, attack, and then vanish into the wilderness. Now good luck for drones to follow them. Here you can see insurgents on motorcycles storm a checkpoint near the Burkina Faso border. Notice how these insurgents only use the motorcycles to get to the position, but then they fight on foot. They even came up with their own motorcycle technical, with the Chinese-made W85 heavy machine gun installed at the back. And when it's time to fight, the combatant dismounts and unleashes a storm of steel on the enemy. Once the position is conquered and looted, everyone can quickly pull out. In response, during Operation Barkhane, the French mimicked the tactics of the insurgents and created their own motorcycle units. And a couple years later, it seems to have been pretty standardized for recon missions. For example, Estonian SOF from Task Force Takuba often patrolled the Malian desert riding motorcycles, like this one you can see on screen, which seems to be riding a KMT EXCF motorbike. As part of the UN's peacekeeping mission, British soldiers of the, wait for it, Queen's Dragoon Guards were pictured chasing insurgents aboard MRAPs, ATVs, and motorcycles. And I've also seen pictures of Dutch special forces also using motorbikes and ATVs. However, the concept of duo motorbike ATV units was never really expanded until Wagner showed up in Africa. And do you know why? I mean, we don't have a clear answer, but we can only speculate they learned that from their experience in Syria. Turns out in the first years of the Syrian civil war, Bashar al-Assad's government army used a lot of the tactics used by the insurgents. One example of the successful use of motorcycles by the Syrian Arab army was the liberation of the city of Salma in the northeastern province of Latakia in 2016, when the Syrian military used about 80 iron horses to get their troops right inside an enemy stronghold. In the end, what's important is that Russian mercenaries kept driving around Mali, the Central African Republic, in dedicated units equipped with motorbikes. This allowed them to form very flexible, quick reaction forces. From there, we can speculate that former Wagnerians that have been integrated into storm detachments must have been like, why don't we use motorcycles to tear the Ukrainians a new one? There's another historical aspect that we often forget. Off-road motorcycles used for motocross races only began to gain popularity in the 1960s and 1970s. These modern motorcycles then became trendy in developing countries over the following decades as an alternative to cars, especially in Southeast Asia. So before we continue and discuss the tactics used by motorcycle units of the Russian army, let's quickly take a look at the type of motorbikes they use to carry out these missions. In this fundraising campaign led by volunteers, we see about 20 to 30 Minsk X250 motorbikes. The 250 at the end stands for 250cc, which refers to the engine displacement of the motorcycle, which in this case is 250 cubic centimeters. Generally, a 250cc engine offers a balance between fuel efficiency and power, making it suitable for a wide range of uses, like storming Ukrainian trenches. In the end, many claim that the Belarusian Minsk X250 is a rugged off-road motorcycle with a solid reputation for durability in challenging conditions. Meanwhile, in this video, these Russian soldiers seem to be using a Chinese-made Zhongshan RX-3 250. One of such motorcycles typically costs around 3,000 to 4,500 USD. In other fundraising campaigns, Russian units asked for Fuego Tekken 250s. Due to the proximity with China, the approximate price in Novosibirsk for one Fuego Tekken was just above 200,000 rubles, or 2,200 USD, making it an affordable option for assault detachments that need versatile and low-cost vehicles. Now, I'm not a motorcycle expert, so correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've read, the soldiers preferred the Minsk X250, followed by the Zhongshan RX-3, since they have better off-road capabilities and, generally speaking, a more robust design, compared to the less powerful Fuego Tekken, for example. But overall, they use a wide variety of motorbikes. Here we see how a fundraiser allowed this Russian army unit to purchase 48 motorcycles, which seem to be Yamaha model WR250F. They're twice as expensive as the other ones I showed you before, but they're robust and extremely resilient in difficult terrains. Depending on the mission, some units even prefer more lightweight and cheaper motorcycles such as pit bikes, ranging from 50cc to 150cc, like these Russian soldiers that seem happy to have received two KTM 105SX. It's important to note that in many Russian units, every soldier donates 10,000 rubles a month for the purchase of new equipment like motorbikes. This means a 20-man unit can buy a new motorcycle every month. But as always, these units look at the cost-benefit analysis. In terms of cost, these soldiers from the DPR said, "Thanks for your help, we were able to quickly raise 440,000 rubles. It allowed us to buy two light motocross motorcycles. This means 2,400 USD per bike. Quick math, to equip a 12-man Ghost Rider squad, it would cost $28,800. For example, for the price of one Russian MRAP, like the Kamaz 53949 Typhoon, which costs about $1 million, you could equip nearly 35 assault motorcycle squads. On top of motorbikes, many units move using ATVs, also known as quad bikes. Already before the Ukraine war, Russian special forces trained with the AM-1 Tulchanka ATVs. Such ATVs cost at least 10 to 15,000 USD per unit, but they can also range up to $50,000, so they're much more expensive than motorbikes. Since they're also less maneuverable than motorbikes, they're mostly used for logistics and Medevac. Each one of them has a carrying capacity of 300 kilograms and a speed of up to 80 kilometers per hour. On top of that, the AM1 model can be safely operated in minus 20 degrees Celsius weather. Another use of ATVs can be seen in this video, where we see 3 men of the 247th Guards Air Assault Regiment sitting on the same ATV. Despite heavy fire, the driver continues the mission and drops off the 2 men behind him. We can imagine this unit really needed these 2 replacements to be brought to them ASAP. But this also goes to show the flexibility of the Russian army. On a side note, we could also think that the Russian troops didn't want to have 2 motorcycles sitting in a trench line. But there's another reason why these soldiers might have been brought to the front using an ATV. And you'll understand why in a second. In the past few weeks, the Russian armed forces have been standardizing the training for motorcycle assault platoons, clearly demonstrating their importance on the modern battlefield. Soldiers are even coming up with new assault rifles specialized for motorcycle attacks. During training, we see a group of 3 soldiers quickly dismount from their ATV as they practice the storming of an enemy trench. At the same time, motorcyclists train in combination with drone operators who guide them through a specific itinerary. As a matter of fact, they built entire replicas of Ukrainian armed forces strongholds. In this video from May, we see one such training ground. We see 2 binomes each on a motorcycle, quickly followed by a third one, as the others enter the mock-up of a Ukrainian trench. And at the end of the video, we see how the 6-man assault team clears out the entire position. Motorcycle assaults are now being practiced by every Russian regiment. Here, the instructors explain that a Ukrainian soldier in a foxhole will not have time to shoot at the attackers as they zip by right in front of him. The second one says the most important thing is not to fall down from the bike, as this will slow down the entire attack force and put everyone in jeopardy. Meanwhile, in this footage, we see a motorcycle squad practice an assault in combination with IVs. The task of the Ghost Riders is to be the first ones to land and get a foothold in the enemy position, to keep the defenders busy while the others arrive and disembark from the IVs. We can also get a first-person view of how the motorcyclists jump off their bikes to assault enemy trenches. Their main strength can also be their greatest weakness. As you could see in the last videos, the soldiers have to leave their motorcycles somewhere behind during the assault, just like the dragoons 2 centuries ago with their horses. Now the problem is that this clearly indicates their position to enemy drones. Grenade-dropping drones are too slow to stop Russian motorcycle units, but they can handicap them by dropping explosives on their motorcycles. Vladimir, you're walking home! But as you can imagine, the real threat for motorcyclists are enemy FPV drones that will quickly chase them down. I mean, if you're spotted and one of them is after you, it's GG well played. I mean, I've seen videos where the motorcyclists jump off the bike at the last moment, but yeah, it's pretty Rambo. It's important to note that indirectly it causes severe attrition on Ukrainian drones as they need 1 FPV drone for 1 motorcycle, so a total of 12 to take down an entire squad, as opposed to 2 or 3 drones to destroy an IV. Meanwhile, in the first days of July, 12 kilometers east of Vuhledar, the Ukrainian Black Cossacks claim to have eliminated multiple armored vehicles, including a unit of 23 motorcyclists. However, like I told you in the introduction, it only takes a second to see that there are 0 Russian fatalities there. Similarly, on the 16th of July, we see the aftermath of another drone strike on a Russian motorcycle unit. This time, out of a group of 6 motorcycles and a buggy, there are only 2 confirmed Russian KIAs. In response to the threat posed by FPV drones, some Russian troops found creative ways to protect themselves. These guys added a cage around the motorcycle, while these ones installed smoke dispensing mines at the back to camouflage their movements. Sort of. We could also see an ATV crew equipped with a shotgun to take down incoming FPV drones. However, not sure if we can consider any of these ideas as viable long-term solutions. More seriously, many units scotch-taped electronic warfare equipment behind the motorcycle in an attempt to jam incoming drones. And this tactic seems to have worked and provided the Russian army with a lot of success. Let's study what happened in mid-July to the Española battalion near Chasiv. Their mission required the use of motorcycles in order to rush troops right inside Chasiv. The key element is how their motorized assault detachment was supposed to be equipped with 3 of these electronic warfare systems. They're important because they can cover the entire frequency spectrum within a radius of 400 to 500 meters, and thus prevent FPV drone strikes. However, the detachment commander Pitbull forgot the EW systems at the PPD, Punkt Постоянной Dislokacji, or Point of Permanent Deployment. Due to the urgency, Pitbull still carried out the operation. The longest and most dangerous axis of attack was covered by soldiers on motorcycles. Meanwhile, separate groups of dismounted stormtroopers took care of enemy strongholds. In the end, Pitbull's intense motocross training paid off, and his men accomplished the mission. But he reported that 3 bikes were complete write-offs, and 3 others needed heavy repairs. This explains the constant need for new motorbike purchases, since many of them are seen as expendable and one-time use. The report also mentioned something very important. Many motorcycle units completed their missions without being noticed. That's why we don't have Ukrainian drone footage of them going back and forth. Apart from EW systems, another alternative that is being discussed in the ranks of the Russian army is the use of electric bikes. They're silent and have a reduced heat signature that makes them more difficult to be detected by thermal optics. Apart from combat missions and logistics, motorcycles offer a wide range of uses. For example, like these Russian drone operators that use motorcycles to retrieve their fallen drones. The Night Wolves UAV squad of the Piętnastka brigade explained how with motorbikes they become much more mobile. They can get really close to the front and launch their UAVs from there. The journey only takes them 10 minutes on a motorcycle, but the danger comes from leaving the vehicle behind, which then can help the enemy spot their location. So the only way for motorcycle assault detachments to get a bigger role in this war is to find a solution with the motorcycles you leave behind. One solution could be to have vehicles that retrieve all these motorcycles, but I'm not sure this is a viable solution. Perhaps we could look at a low-tech solution. So when the soldiers attack an enemy trench and leave the motorcycles behind, they could find a way to use some sort of camouflage net or tarpaulin to cover the motorbikes from enemy drones. And only later, once the sector is secured, all the motorbikes could be retrieved by vehicles. I don't know. What do you think? That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The link is in the description below.